The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, thin, official, the kind people usually toss on the counter and forget about until the weekend. I almost did the same. It sat there for hours, untouched, while I made coffee and answered emails and pretended it wasn't there. It had my name on it. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the return address. County records, property division. I hadn't requested anything. I hadn't changed anything. I hadn't missed a payment. I was careful about that. I always had been. I opened it, standing up. The paper inside was stiff, folded once, clean edges, no apology in the formatting, just information, parcel, number, address, legal description. Then, a line that made me stop breathing without realizing it. Owner of record. The name underneath wasn't mine. I read it again, slowly, the way you do when you think your eyes are the problem. Same result. I checked the address. Same house. The one with the creaky third step and the fig tree my mother never liked. The one I'd grown up in. The one I still paid the property taxes on because it was easier that way. I sat down, not because I felt weak, because there was nowhere else to put the moment. I turned the page, expecting an explanation. There wasn't one. Just a date, months ago, a filing number, a signature I recognized immediately. My father's. My phone was already in my hand. I didn't remember picking it up. I opened the family group chat, the one with the cheerful name and the old photo no one bothered to update. I typed carefully. Did the house get transferred? No punctuation, no accusation, just a question that had already answered itself. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. My brother replied, yeah, one word. Nothing after it. I waited, not because I needed more, because silence had trained me to. A minute passed, then another. No one else chimed in. No explanation arrived late, out of breath. No follow-up asking how I'd found out. Just that one word. Yeah. I didn't respond. I scrolled back through old messages instead. Birthdays, reminders, small jokes that never quite landed. Photos of holidays where I was always slightly off to the side, holding a plate or a coat or someone else's child. I closed the app. The house hadn't disappeared. It hadn't been sold. It had simply changed hands. Quietly, efficiently. Without me, I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, nothing looked different. The street was the same. Cars passed. Someone across the way watered their lawn with too much enthusiasm. It occurred to me then that this wasn't an emergency. No sirens, no raised voices, no one rushing to explain it was settled. That was the unsettling part. I sat back down and read the letter again, this time for tone. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't kind. It was factual, almost gentle in its indifference. The county didn't care who felt what. It only cared who signed where. I opened my calendar and checked the date. I had paid the taxes 2 weeks ago, on time. As usual. The receipt was still in my email. I didn't feel angry. That came later. What I felt first was familiar. That quiet sense of being late to a conversation that had already ended. I drafted another message, deleted it, drafted a third, shorter, more neutral. Why wasn't I told? I didn't send it, because I already knew the answer, or at least the version they would give me. It would be framed as practical, as simple, as something that didn't need discussion. It would be about ease, about not wanting to make things complicated. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, not because it needed to be hidden, but because I wanted to see if my hands would shake. They didn't. That surprised me. I thought about calling my mother. I imagined the pause before she spoke, the way she would soften her voice without softening the message, the way concern and dismissal could coexist so naturally in the same sentence. I didn't call. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the tax portal. The numbers were still there. My name still attached to the payments. The system hadn't caught up yet. Neither had my family. It struck me then that the transfer hadn't required my absence, just my silence. The same one I'd offered so icily over the years. The same one that made things smoother, easier. I closed the laptop. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. We'll talk later. No apology, no urgency, just a promise that floated without a time attached. I replied with a single word. Okay, I meant it. Because in that moment, something had already shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. I placed the envelope in a drawer and shut it carefully. For the first time, I understood that the house hadn't been taken from me. It had been decided away from me, and that difference mattered more than anyone realized. When I think back, it's easy to pretend this started with the house. It didn't. The house was just paperwork, a signature, a consequence. The lesson came much earlier in our family. Peace was treated like a shared resource, finite, fragile, something you didn't disturb unless it was absolutely necessary, and even then, you were expected to fix the disturbance quickly, quietly, preferably by yourself. I learned that young, not through lectures, through observation. I noticed how conversations shifted when voices rose, how my mother's jaw tightened, just slightly, when someone asked too many questions, how my father's patience thinned when emotions took too long to resolve. There were no dramatic scenes, no slammed doors, just a steady reward system. Calm was praised, silence was interpreted as maturity, agreement was called respect. I was good at those things. I learned to read a room before speaking, to soften my opinions until they sounded optional, to offer solutions instead of reactions. If something bothered me, I waited until it no longer showed. That was considered strength. My brother learned something else. He learned that charm smoothed over inconvenience, that if you said the right thing at the right time, you didn't have to say much at all. He was easy in a way people liked immediately. He laughed when expected. He shrugged when things went wrong. If I was thoughtful, he was agreeable. If I was careful, he was relaxed. When relatives visited, I helped in the kitchen, without being asked. It felt natural. I liked knowing where things were. I liked being useful. I liked that no one worried when I was around. My brother drifted in and out of the room. He was praised for showing up, for making jokes, for not making things heavy. "You're so easy," someone once told him. It was meant as a compliment. I don't remember anyone saying that to me. Instead, I heard things like, "She understands," or "She won't mind," or "She's fine with it." Those phrases followed me into adolescence. Then adulthood. I became the one people checked in with last, the one whose schedule could bend, the one who didn't need things explained in advance. Because I was reasonable. Because I didn't make a fuss. Because I handled things when something felt unfair. I learned to translate that feeling into something more acceptable, practical, polite. If I couldn't, I kept it to myself. I didn't want to be the reason a dinner went quiet. That fear sat quietly in the background, not dramatic, just persistent. Don't disrupt, don't complicate, don't be difficult. My brother never had to learn that lesson so precisely. If he missed a detail, it was forgiven. If he changed his mind, it was accommodated. His discomfort was addressed quickly, often before he had to mention it. Mine was assumed to be manageable. I don't blame him for that. It wasn't a scheme, it was a pattern. Patterns don't announce themselves, they just repeat until they feel normal. By the time I left home, the roles were already set. I was the steady one, the one who could be counted on, the one who would understand if plans changed or explanations were delayed. Understanding became my default response, even when it cost me something. Especially then, when I met my husband years later. This training slipped into place without resistance. I didn't notice it happening. It felt familiar, comfortable, even. His family valued harmony. They praised flexibility. They avoided conflict with impressive consistency. I fit right in. I listened more than I spoke. I offered help before it was requested. I stepped in when things needed to be done so no one else had to feel awkward about it. People liked that. They called me thoughtful, dependable, a relief. No one asked what I needed, and I didn't think to tell them. Silence had worked before. It had kept things smooth. It had kept me included, or so I thought. Looking back now, I can see how easily I carried my childhood lessons forward, how naturally I slipped into a role that required effort but offered little visibility. I didn't question it. Why would I? It had always been this way. Peace, after all, was more important than comfort, more important than fairness, more important than clarity. That was the rule I had learned, and I followed it straight into my marriage, believing it would protect me the way it always had. I didn't realize yet that peace, when it's one-sided, doesn't protect, it prepares. Marriage didn't change the pattern, it refined it. From the outside, everything looked balanced. His family was polite, warm, even. They smiled easily, asked the right questions, spoke in a tone that suggested consideration, without ever requiring it. Nothing was openly wrong, which made it harder to name what was. Early on, I noticed how roles settled into place without discussion. No meeting, no announcement, just repetition. His parents hosted most gatherings. Holidays rotated through their house with predictable efficiency. His sister arrived late and was greeted loudly. Her opinions were treated like entertainment, optional, but welcome. My husband hovered near the middle of things. He carried plates when asked, offered to help when someone else had already stepped in. He wanted everyone comfortable, especially his parents. Conflict made him uneasy, silence did not. And me, I filled the spaces no one looked at directly. I noticed when trash needed to be taken out before it overflowed, when dishes piled up faster than conversation, when someone's glass stayed empty for too long. I moved without being asked, not because I was told to, but because it was easier than watching the gap remain. No one stopped me. That felt like permission. At first, I told myself it was temporary. New family dynamics always took time. I didn't want to overreact. I didn't want to be the person who read too much into small things. But small things accumulate. I wasn't included in planning conversations. I learned dates secondhand. Sometimes the night before, sometimes after decisions were already made. When seating was arranged, there was never a question about where I would sit. It was wherever space remained. When photos were taken, someone would gesture vaguely in my direction. You can stand there. It wasn't unkind, just efficient. No one asked for my input. No one objected when I stayed quiet. Once, I offered a suggestion about a holiday menu. A simple comment. Thoughtful, I believed. It landed softly. Too softly. "Oh, we're keeping it light this year," my mother-in-law said, smiling. Nothing complicated. The word lingered. Complicated. I nodded, stepped back, let it go. Another time, I mentioned a scheduling conflict weeks in advance. It was acknowledged, then ignored. When the event came, my absence was treated as unfortunate but unavoidable. "Things get busy," someone said. "You understand?" I always did. My husband noticed some of it. Not enough to intervene, enough to feel uncomfortable. He would catch my eye occasionally, a look that said, "I see it," not followed by action, just recognition. Later, he'd tell me, quietly, "They don't mean anything by it." I didn't argue. Meaning wasn't the issue. Impact was. There was one person who watched more closely, an outsider. She wasn't part of the family orbit. She didn't grow up with their habits. She wasn't invested in keeping things smooth. She worked with numbers, details, patterns. She met them because of business. Because I brought her in. At first, she assumed I was just generous. She commented on how much I handled, how seamlessly I kept things running. "You do a lot," she said once, not accusing, just observant. I smiled, changed the subject. Over time, her questions became more precise. "Is this what you agreed to? Do they know you're covering that? Are you okay with how this is structured?" I answered vaguely. I didn't want to sound defensive or ungrateful. Still, she noticed what others didn't. How instructions were phrased when directed at me. Not requests, expectations. "Can you just handle the kitchen? You're better with details. You don't mind, right?" Always framed as compliments. Always followed by silence when I complied. As holidays passed, the exclusions became more intentional, still subtle, still deniable. Group messages where plans were discussed but my responses weren't acknowledged. Decisions made after I offered availability that was never referenced again. Once, I arrived early to help, out of habit, out of routine. I was already tying an apron when I realized no one else had moved. They were sitting, talking, waiting for me to finish. No one said it out loud. They didn't have to. I served food that day, refreshed drinks, cleared plates. At one point, my husband stood up to help. His mother waved him off gently. "It's fine," she said. "She's got it." He sat back down. I caught his eye again, held it for a moment longer than usual. He looked away. That was new. Later alone, I asked him if he noticed. He paused, long enough for the silence to answer first. "I just don't want things to be awkward," he said eventually. "They're sensitive about feeling judged." I didn't ask where that left me. The truth was forming quietly, not as anger, as clarity. I wasn't being overlooked. I was being placed. Placed where I was useful, where I wouldn't interrupt the image they wanted to maintain, where my effort would be felt but not acknowledged. Service doesn't require recognition to function. That's why it's so easy to assign. By the time I fully understood this, something had already shifted inside me. I stopped offering suggestions, stopped filling every gap immediately. I waited. The gaps remained. No one rushed to fill them. That told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't part of the circle. I was orbiting it, and slowly, deliberately, I could feel myself being positioned just far enough away that removal would feel natural when it happened. I didn't protest, I watched. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you don't interrupt it, you let it reveal itself. And I could sense that the moment of confirmation wasn't far off. The confirmation didn't arrive dramatically. There was no argument, no raised voices, no moment that demanded a response. It came the way these things always had, quietly, politely, as if it had already been agreed upon. It was a holiday weekend, the kind that repeats every year with small variations and the same expectations. I arrived at his parents' house early, like always, not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew how the day would unfold if I didn't. The kitchen was already busy, not with people cooking, with plans being executed. My mother-in-law handed me a list without looking up, not written, spoken. Can you start on the sides? Plates should go out around 1. We'll probably need extra serving spoons. Her tone was calm, efficient, familiar, not a request, an instruction. I nodded, took the apron from the hook where it always hung, the same one I'd used for years. No one asked if I wanted help, no. One asked if I wanted to sit. They assumed I knew where I belonged. At some point, I noticed my coat was still on the chair in the entryway, untouched. Everyone else had already settled in, drinks poured, conversations layered comfortably over one another. I was still standing. Later, when guests arrived, introductions were made around me, not excluding me intentionally, just not pausing long enough to include me fully. This is our neighbor, that's his cousin. Oh, you remember her? No title, no placement, just presence without context. At the table, seating filled quickly, chairs scraped back, laughter moved easily across the room. When I finally stepped out of the kitchen with a dish in my hands, there was no seat waiting for me. Someone gestured toward the counter. You can just set that there. So I did. I ate standing up, small bites between tasks. No one commented. At one point, my husband caught me watching the table. He stood halfway, uncertain. His mother spoke before he did. She's fine, she said gently. She prefers to stay busy. It wasn't unkind, it was definitive. He sat back down. That was the moment? Not because it hurt, because it clarified. I wasn't a guest who happened to help. I was help who happened to be married in. Later, when dessert was being discussed, my sister-in-law leaned toward me. Her voice was light, almost friendly. Can you handle coffee? She asked. We're going to step outside for a bit. I looked at her, really looked. She was already turning away. I said yes, not because I had to, because I wanted to see what would happen if I stopped pretending this was temporary. I made the coffee, served it, cleared plates again. I moved through the room like a shadow no one questioned. At some point, my husband came into the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, unsure. You, okay? He asked. I nodded. That was all he needed. No follow-up, no adjustment. Peace restored. Later that evening, as people prepared to leave, my mother-in-law spoke to me again, calm, casual. Oh, next time, she said. We'll probably have you come earlier. It just works better when everything's ready on time. Next time, as if this had already been decided. I smiled, said nothing. On the drive home, the car was quiet, the kind of quiet that waits to see if someone will break it. ID and single quotes T. Eventually, my husband spoke. They didn't mean anything by it. I watched the road ahead. I know, I said. And I did. That was the problem. Meaning wasn't required anymore. The pattern was complete. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, not replaying conversations, not imagining alternatives, just reviewing facts. No one had asked how I wanted to spend the holiday. No one had thanked me for the work I did. No one had noticed when I stopped participating socially. They hadn't needed to remove me. I had been placed outside already. All that was left was to decide whether I would continue filling gaps that benefited everyone but me. The next morning, a message came through the family group chat. Plans for the next gathering. Dates, assignments, expectations. My name appeared next to tasks, not once next to a seat. I read it carefully, then set my phone down. I didn't respond. Not immediately. I wanted to be sure. Later that afternoon, my husband mentioned it, casually. Did you see the message? Yes. You didn't reply. I didn't need to. He hesitated. They're probably just assuming I know what they're assuming, I said. My voice was steady. He didn't argue. That was when I made the decision quietly, completely. I would stop filling gaps that no one acknowledged. Not out of anger, out of accuracy. I would stop protecting an illusion that required my silence to survive. And I would let the truth stand on its own, even if it took time for anyone else to see it, because once you accept that you are never a guest, you stop waiting to be invited. You step back, and you watch what happens when the room has to function without you. I didn't withdraw all at once. That would have been noticeable. I did it the way I'd learned to do everything else, gradually, without explanation. The next gathering came sooner than expected. Different house, same roles. I arrived on time. Not early. I brought one dish. Something simple. I set it down and stepped back. No apron, no positioning myself near the kitchen, no preemptive scanning for what needed to be fixed. I took a seat. There was a pause. Not long, just long enough to register. Someone else stood to help. A chair scraped. A question floated. Where's the extra serving spoon? No one looked at me. I watched the room adjust. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't dramatic. It was just unfamiliar. The rhythm had changed. I ate slowly, listened more than I spoke. When someone asked me to pass something, I did. When they asked if I could take plates, I smiled and said, "I'll grab mine when I'm done." They nodded, accepted it, peace preserved. That was the rule. After all. Later, my phone buzzed. A quiet vibration against the table. I glanced down. A message from my colleague, the only person outside the family who knew the full structure of the finances. We finalized the review. It read, "Everything checks out, you're covered." I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. The truth didn't require my immediate participation anymore. For years, I had handled the funding quietly, not out of secrecy, out of convenience. It was easier that way. I had the credit history, the stability, the ability to absorb risk without it becoming a family discussion, so when the business needed a bridge loan, I signed. When guarantees were required, I provided them. When payments fell behind, I covered the gap. That it was never presented as ownership, never framed as control. Just help, temporary, responsible, invisible. The family spoke about the business as if it belonged to them collectively, as if it floated above the details, as if success came from effort alone. I didn't correct them. I didn't need credit. I needed things to function. But once I stopped filling gaps at home, I stopped filling them everywhere else too. Not abruptly, accurately. The conversation at the table shifted to the business, as it often did. Sales projections, a potential expansion. Someone joked about how tight things had been last quarter. It worked out, my father-in-law said. We always land on our feet. My husband nodded. Someone raised a glass. I took a sip of water. Across the table, my sister-in-law leaned toward her husband. "Did you ever send that document?" she asked casually. "What document?" he said. "The one about the loan renewal, from the bank." There was a pause. Not tense, just searching. "I thought Mom handled that," he said. She shook her head. "No, she said it came through you." He frowned. "I didn't see anything." My mother-in-law looked up. "It was emailed to the primary guarantor," she said. "Certain. They always do that." The table quieted slightly. Not silent, just attentive. My colleague's message echoed in my pocket. I didn't move. My father-in-law turned toward me. Not directly. More like his gaze landed there as he worked backward through the logic. "You still get those emails, don't you?" he asked. Light, almost amused. I met his eyes. "Yes," I said. That was all. No explanation, no clarification, no added detail, just a fact. The conversation stalled. Not because of shock, because of recalibration. Someone laughed softly. "Well, that makes sense," they said, without conviction. Plates clinked. Someone reached for bread. I let the moment pass. Later, when dessert came out late, slightly disorganized, my phone buzzed again. A follow-up message. Also, my colleague wrote, "Once the last payment clears, the clause activates. Ownership shifts automatically if there's a lapse." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The room was already doing the work for me. Questions began forming. Not out loud yet. Eyes lingered a second longer than usual. Conversations restarted with a different tone. No one accused, no one apologized. They were simply adjusting to new information. On the drive home, my husband was quiet. Finally, he said, "I didn't realize it was all under you." I kept my eyes on the road. "I know," I said. He waited. I didn't elaborate. At home, I checked my email. The official notice had come through. Clean, professional. No emotion attached, confirmation, timelines, language. That didn't soften facts. I forwarded it to my personal folder, not to the family thread, not to my husband. There was no urgency. The next day my mother-in-law called. Her voice was polite, careful. "We were thinking," she said, "maybe we should all sit down and go over things together." Just to be clear. I considered the wording, the timing. Of course, I said, when it makes sense. She agreed quickly, too quickly. We ended the call. I didn't schedule anything. I didn't need to. Because once you stop managing perception, reality doesn't need your help. Over the next week, small things shifted. Fewer assumptions, more questions. My name mentioned with a different inflection, not authority, acknowledgement, no. One asked me to serve again. No one handed me a list. They waited, and in that waiting, the structure they'd relied on quietly revealed itself. Through confrontation. Through absence. I hadn't announced anything. I hadn't demanded recognition. I had simply let the truth stand where it always had, unsupported, unembellished, and finally visible. And I watched as the room learned how much weight silence can carry when it's no longer doing the work for everyone else. The meeting happened 2 weeks later, not because I scheduled it, because they did. A time, a place neutral, a conference room near the business office, glass walls, water bottles lined up like an offering. Everyone arrived early. That alone told me something had shifted. They didn't greet me the way they used to. No casual directives, no assumptions, just nods, polite smiles, space being made where it hadn't existed before. I sat down, opened my notebook, waited. My father-in-law spoke first. Carefully. We realized there are things we should have understood better. He didn't say earlier. He didn't say from you. I let him continue. He talked about growth, about pressure, about how families blur lines when things move fast. He spoke like someone reading minutes from a meeting he hadn't attended but now wanted credit for. I listened. When he finished, he looked at me expectantly. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Eventually, my mother-in-law leaned forward. We appreciate everything you've done, she said. We just want clarity going forward. Clarity. The word landed gently, but it carried weight. I agree, I said. That surprised them, not because of disagreement, because I didn't soften it. I opened my notebook, not dramatically, just enough to show I'd come prepared. I'll continue honoring the agreements already in place, I said. Nothing changes there. Relief passed across a few faces. But, I continued, any new obligations will need to be discussed formally, in writing, with full transparency. No raised voices, no defensiveness, just a boundary, placed where assumption used to live. My husband shifted in his chair, not uncomfortable, just aware. And, I added, I won't be managing logistics anymore, at home or otherwise. That one landed differently, not because it affected money, because it affected habit. My sister-in-law blinked. You mean, holidays? I mean anything that requires me to disappear into function, I said. I'll participate. I won't serve. The room was quiet, not offended. Rearranging. My father-in-law nodded slowly. That's fair, he said. He didn't sound convinced. He sounded corrected. We wrapped up quickly after that. No arguments, no objections, just agreements being written down where they should have been all along. Outside, my husband walked beside me in silence. In the car, he said, I didn't see it before. I believed him. I see it now. I nodded. That was enough. The next holiday came and went without incident. I arrived when invited. I left when ready. There was food on the table. Someone else cooked. Someone else cleaned. No one asked where I was. No one asked what I was doing. They didn't need to. The business stabilized, not because of conflict, because of clarity, roles defined, expectations written, support acknowledged instead of absorbed. I stayed involved, on my terms. At home, things felt quieter, not colder, just honest. My husband stopped assuming, started asking. Not permission. Presence. One evening, he said, I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I looked at him. I didn't need you to fight, I said. I needed you to see me. He nodded. I do now. That mattered more than apology. The family didn't change overnight. They didn't suddenly become self-aware or reflective. They just adjusted. Because when someone stops carrying weight they were never meant to hold, everyone else feels the shift, and they adapt. No one asked me to serve again. Because I demanded respect. Because I stopped trading myself for peace. I didn't leave the family. I didn't burn bridges. I stayed exactly where I was, and made myself visible. That was enough. Peace doesn't come from being agreeable. It comes from being clear. And once you choose that, the room learns how to meet you there. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe, because sometimes the quietest truth is the hardest to ignore.